Welcome to Coach Fireside Chat, the podcast where we strip away the glamour and get straight to the heart of coaching. No scripts, no filters, just honest, raw conversations with coaches who are out there making a real impact. I'm Karl Sandland, your host and growth strategist for coaches. I work with coaches to help them build, scale, and create lasting impact in the industry. And in this podcast, I sit down with experienced coaches to deep dive into their journey, their struggles, their breakthroughs, and their unfiltered take on what it really means to be a coach. Whether you're an aspiring coach looking to grow your practice, or you're searching for the right coach to support your personal or professional transformation, this podcast is for you. No fluff, no sales pitches, just real talk about the coaching world from those who are doing the work and changing lives. So grab a seat by the fire and let's get into it. Hello and welcome to this special edition Coach Fireside Chat. So today we're going to be discussing the very latest in neuroscience information of what it means to be fully human with multiple intelligences that we can tap into to be the best possible versions of ourselves. We're going to discuss how, as a coach, we can work with physiology and neurology to reach the deepest sense of who we are as individuals, and knowing this changes everything. On paper, my guest today, Dr. Suzanne Henwood, looks like she had all her career mapped out. She was at the top of her game as a published author, sought-after speaker, podcast and summit guest, conference presenter, associate professor in health. You know, she must have got all of that magic formula for knowing who she is, right? How she ticks and is on track to really fulfill her life purpose. But scratch beneath the surface and you'd find someone that's not all sure who she really was. And in 2012, everything changed. She discovered that she'd only been working with one of her intelligences, and it blew her world absolutely wide open. She started a creative, deep, fascinating journey, and she has an integrated, embodied, award-winning neuroscience-based coach using cutting-edge research and knowledge to underpin all of her work. And she's been instrumental in developing a new field of coaching, the neuroscience of multiple intelligences. So 7 years of research and developments led to a world-first psychometric tool to identify which intelligences people are using in their decision-making and in life. And as an integrated coaching approach, taking people deeper and wider to fully connect with themselves and to the world to help them love themselves back to wholeness. So I'm super excited and honored to have Dr. Suzanne Henwood with me today. Welcome, Suzanne.
Kia ora, Karl.
How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
So the burning question that I have is, well, it's more of a statement that then leads into a question. It's, oh my God, you mean my head brain is not the control center of my body after all?
Well, we have grown up, haven't we, being taught that our brain is like a computer, that, that metaphor of it being a computer, that the head's in control, that, the head is sending all this information down to the body and the body just does as it's told. That's not true. It really isn't true. And actually, we've known it right back in ancient wisdom times. We knew it. Descartes, probably the one who is blamed for cutting us off at the neck and focusing on the head. But we have willingly gone with that as a society, and our schools and our learning all focus on thinking and logic and knowledge and analysis. And our bodies are sat underneath going, notice me, notice me, notice me.
Or as I thought was just saying, tell me what to do. All your limbs and your organs say, I'm waiting for signals from you. But it's not the way, right?
It's not. There's some beautiful research that shows we've made the decision in the body before the head's consciously aware of it. Even to the point that on a computer screen, you can predict what someone's going to choose by their responses in their body before the picture has kind of changed. So it all does get very strange when you look at the research around this stuff.
Wow, that's amazing. So There are multiple intelligences. So what are these multiple intelligences, these multiple brains that we have, and what are they responsible for? How do they contribute to each other, or in some cases work against each other?
Yeah, it's a great question. I want to preface it by saying my belief is that we're a complex system, and that in a way to artificially cut them into segments does away with a lot of our power and our, opportunity. But to understand things, often we have to kind of take them in bite-sized chunks. And bite-sized chunks is a really interesting neuro-linguistic lead into the fact that we have a gut brain.
Mm-hmm.
So our gut brain is definitely one of them. It looks after you and all things safety, self-preservation. It's where a lot of your boundaries sit. It's where we take action or not take action on something. So anyone here who works in a team who has a procrastinator, that's a gut function. They're not being lazy. It's a gut function that's not kicking in fully. For me, the one that kind of threw me at gut brain was core identity. And that was the moment in the one particular kind of field of training that I did where I had this moment. I don't know if your listeners can relate to this, where somebody says something to you and literally you feel yourself wobble and everything you thought you believed goes out the window and you're not quite sure where you're going to land. And it was that moment when I was listening that our core identity is at gut level and our vagus nerve is 90% sending information up to the head. Now, my head thought it knew who I was. I had worked really hard to get to where I was.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm hearing who I truly am is in my gut. And that's going up. I've spent 20 years personal development, getting to know who I am, and I haven't even started. And it was like someone put a stick of dynamite on all the boundaries to self that I had, and they just fell away. And I literally felt a bit wobbly. And the trainer, who became a very, very good friend and mentor of mine, he looked at me and he said, "Are you okay?" And I went, "I will be. Give me a minute." And I kind of processed it, and I realized that as much as I had done development on myself to become who I was, that had become a boundary to who I could be as well. And that what he had just done in that moment was take away the boundary, and I could be anybody I wanted to be. So it was like a freedom in the moment. So that's kind of gut brain. It's got lots of really important functions that I'm sure we will weave in and talk about as we go on in greater depth.
And of course,
Another
which now
one,
now seems probably quite accurate as well. I mean, you hear people saying, trust your gut,
trust your gut.
as in you just go with your gut. What's your gut telling you?
Yeah.
And it's a term I use all of the time without actually knowing the real meaning behind it, I guess, and the real importance and poignance that it has actually in some of my decision making. So
Yeah, and I will apologize now that in listening to this, you can never go back to not knowing. So you will read it in novels, you will hear it in news broadcasts, you'll be listening to a film and you'll suddenly hear it and you'll be calibrating, oh, they're coming from gut or they're coming from heart. So yeah, there's lots of language prompts that would indicate that we're in gut. Oh, I need time to digest that. That leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. I've got butterflies in my stomach. There's hundreds of
now you point them
everyday
out.
phrases. So as you listen to people, they'll give you a very good indication of which brains they're using. And it's not that we're only using one. It might be that at that moment, that one is having a louder voice than the others.
When we're using those different brains and we're giving those cues, I mean, because I use certain phrases and terminology, and I might not necessarily know which brain I'm using at that time, but does my subconscious know which brain it's using? And therefore, I use those verbal cues to tell others, even though I'm not aware of it. Is that going on?
Absolutely. So in the research that we've been doing to develop a tool to help you know which brain you're using, 60% of our test participants did not know which brain they were using in practice. So the tool is going to be an absolute game changer for coaching, because to be able to bring that level of self-awareness to a client and to leaders and to workers, the scope is enormous. Helps, you can't do anything without awareness. So if you're not aware of which brains you're using or not using, or hushing up, then there's no way you can do the deep change work to bring out more wisdom, inner wisdom from yourself.
So I am using all of my different brains. I'm just not
I'm
aware of
sure you are.
when they're triggering or in
Yeah.
control of picking the one that I use. Is there an element to being able to, when you have that awareness, being able to swap between them and perhaps trigger another brain if the one that's currently firing is not necessarily getting you where you need to be?
Yeah, there are times when you don't want to interrupt what your body's good at. So lots of us walk around with mobile phones. And in fact, there's many people a year die because they're using mobile phones because they're not being safe where they're using them. So if you are walking across a road on a mobile phone and you don't see a car coming, your gut will be the one to say to you, you have got to get out of here now, and you'll jump back without even realizing why you've jumped back.
Wow.
You don't want to interrupt that level of safety, right? No. However, if I'm in a work meeting and maybe somebody looks at me with, that look that just triggers you, or they say something that really gets under your skin, there's another great body piece of metaphor, and your gut responds with a massive safety identity. Don't you dare talk to me like that. How dare you call me that? Possibly not the most appropriate in a board meeting or a leadership team meeting. So to be able to recognize it, internally speak to it and say, I've heard you, thank you for alerting me to that, and we are absolutely going to have a voice and stand up for ourselves in a moment, but let me just think through the best way for them in this moment. Bringing your head in could be really useful in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
We haven't mentioned heart. So heart is another one that, would be good to check into there, because what sits at heart level is your values. So what's truly important to you about this? Why has it irritated you, angered you, frustrated you? Let's see if we can assess which value is being conflicted. Let's involve the heart in this conversation as well. And at heart level, our care for others, our connection with others. Now, whether or not we like somebody in a workplace, there's an element of you've just got to get on. And so bringing a conscious level of compassion into that conversation can be really useful to moderate. Not that you don't let your voice have a say and you be yourself, but that you're just a little bit more considered at how you raise that in a professional context.
Makes absolute sense. So we have head, we have gut, we have heart.
Yeah, how far do you want to go? So in my new kind of world of multiple intelligences, I work with 12 different areas of wisdom, some of which are internal to us and some of which are external. So if we go internal, we have head, heart, and gut. The next one is autonomic nervous system, which is the world of polyvagal and Steve Porges, and lots of people would have heard of his work. That ultimately is, more than anything else, your command and control center. That's the one that determines what we pay attention to, where we focus, ultimate safety. It's running 24/7. It's called neuroception. It's looking inside of me for any risk. Have I eaten something that is off or poisonous? Are there toxins in my system, infection, all of that kind of thing? It's looking externally. So the bus coming down the road, somebody else. If we just met in a dark alley and I'm like going, Are you safe? Are you not safe? Should I walk towards you? Should I walk away? That's your neuroception making those assessments, feeling in for energy, feeling in for all of the environmental cues. And then it's also checking between people. So inside, outside, and between, 24/7 running, giving information. So when something gets under your skin, it's tapping into your autonomic nervous system. It's alerting you to something. Pay attention to something. And that passes it up to your head for your head to then do the processing of pulling all of those bits together to say, okay, what is it that I know? Or dare I say, I don't want to do the head down, love the head. But often the head makes up stories. And so it doesn't like not knowing. So if you have a story with A, B, and D, it'll make C up. And if
Just to fill the gap.
Just to fill the gap. And if C, it might be based on past experience, or Lisa Feldman Barrett's work at the moment is really saying the head is a prediction machine. So from whatever it knows from the past and the present, it predicts what it thinks might be, but often it gets it wrong. But if it's in that story, we believe it as if it's truth.
So that sounds very, I guess, very in line with your perception, your perspective, your belief system. So I've always assumed that your belief system lived partly in your conscious and part in your subconscious, but again, thinking that was in your head. I mean, is there an element to the belief system that spreads through your other brains?
You can hold beliefs at all levels. And so, sometimes when you're working with a client and it feels a bit harder, they're more stuck.
Yeah.
It could possibly be because the belief is at probably a gut level. And so it's held deeper linked to their identity.
Got you.
So it absolutely then can take more work and deeper level of work with the gut to change that. All of the system fundamentally is wired for safety. It doesn't care if you're happy. It doesn't care, particularly if you're moral. Your heart will care if you're moral and ethical. But your body is out for survival. And when push comes to shove, it will do whatever it needs to do to stay alive.
Wow. So, microbiome. And this was something in particular that fascinated me last time we spoke because, as some of the listeners will know, my wife has all sorts of medical issues going on, and we got into quite a discussion then, didn't we, about, well, you might actually want to get her sort of like her gut microorganisms tested and that read, and that just blew my mind, and it blew my wife Lorna's mind as well when I started talking to her about it. We still haven't done it yet, but we are absolutely going to. So help myself and the listeners understand the importance then, or the role of microbiome in our intelligence, because it's not something I would have naturally linked with being, again, to do with intelligence.
Yeah, it's a fascinating field and we're still learning about it, is the short answer. When I first learned about the gut brain back in 2012, microbiome was mentioned, but it wasn't a major part of the learning. And it's one of the reasons why when you go and learn this stuff, make sure you're learning it with people who are not teaching 2012 material, basically, because neuroscience has changed so much in that time. But the microbiome is almost a brain and intelligence in its own right. There are more cells in microbiome cells than there are cells in your body. They have a lot more control than we think they do. So those kind of, mid-morning snacks that you just need to go and reach for, the chocolate bar. And I did use this as a bit of a way of trying to reduce the cravings, because I have a little bit of a I don't like the word control, but I have been accused of being a control freak in my life at times. And so if I think that it's not even me choosing to have that snack, it's my microbiome, it's quite a good inroad to kind of go in, hey, you little buggers, like, we don't even need that. We don't want it. So yeah, I'll sometimes have a little word with my microbiome if I go to reach for something sweet. And you can see I still am a little bit overweight, and we're still working on that, which is interesting. But yeah, microbiome can literally change your taste for something. But more than that, it impacts on so much. There's so many bits where I could go. Serotonin and dopamine, neurotransmitters.
Mm-hmm.
We've always thought they're head brain based. Dopamine traditionally was thought of as the reward chemical. We know it's way more than that now. But what we also know is way more dopamine and serotonin are produced in the gut than in the head. So what's, implications of that? Why is the gut producing that if it hasn't got a use for it, an intelligence for it? So that's really interesting. Then you start to break down the whole world of inflammation and cytokines. Sorry if we're going medical terms here. Little chemicals that get broken down, spread around the body, and put inflammation throughout the body. It's causing all heaps of problems for people medically. That is a gut function. 90% of our immune system is in the gut. So when we have any condition, people are beginning to question now, is the gut involved? And there's a few that we've always thought of were head-based, we now know are actually gut-related. Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and MS is just coming into that frame, which is why we were talking about it last time. Absolutely. So, this is really creating ripples in the medical community. The whole world of mental health, they're saying, is often a gut function as well. So the old serotonin, reuptake drugs, there's questions about those being raised. So we are at really interesting times as humans in us understanding our bodies, and whole new terminology in the medical field is coming out. So what used to be gastroenterology, which was the gut department, there's all sorts of different names coming out, like neurogastroenterology or neuropharmacological gastroenterology. People are beginning. Well, I know, but I think it's really good because I come through a healthcare background, and it is a little bit like you have the heart department here, the gut department here, the neurology here, obs and gynae. If you're having a baby, you're usually in a department somewhere completely different. And if you happen to get something else going on, they're only looking at you as a pregnant woman. So I had a serious issue after my second child, and I said, I am unwell. Oh, you've just had a cesarean section. I said, no, I'm not talking about a gut being ripped open. I'm talking about systemically, I am unwell. And I ended up with pneumonia and a pulmonary embolism. And they nearly missed it because I was in the wrong department for that. I was in a pregnancy department.
Of course, and they're just not looking for that because you're there for a reason, and that's the observations that they keep on you.
Absolutely. So I think it's really good that we're now standing back and looking at the whole body, and departments are starting to really talk to each other and cross-fertilizing what we know, because a lot of these conditions, anything that's autoimmune, you have to look at the whole body. Some of these conditions that look like they were head-based, absolutely, we've got to look at the body.
It's fascinating, but it's also somewhat scary because it almost rocks you a little bit and makes you think, well, this is not what we were brought up to believe. This is just not what you expect to find in medical books, in encyclopedias, when you start Googling. It's quite scary to think that after decades, well, hundreds of years, medical and scientific research, we're now questioning it, or we're saying, well, actually, there's a completely different way of looking at this. It's almost like exploring space again, but domestically.
Yeah, I think, over the years we've kind of stopped holding doctors as gods. We used to put them on a pedestal and they knew everything. And then we kind of went into patient-informed choice. And some people struggled with that because actually they went to the doctor wanting to be told what choice to make. But I do think at the moment that as patients, we need to go with some information, not pretending we know because we've looked at it on Google, but at least with some sensible questions to ask. And if the medic that you're speaking to is not prepared to even have those conversations, I'd be looking for a second opinion.
Something that you said a short while ago about how things link together. I remember back to when my wife was pregnant with our 7-year-old, and the specialist consultant who's her MS specialist consultant he was almost like a child in a sweet shop. It's like, oh, can we do some additional research on you and ask you a few extra questions and do this, that, and the other? Because what they said was when she's pregnant, because of the difference in chemicals and hormones, that it basically suppresses her MS. She's pretty much symptomless whilst pregnant. And
you
of
just have to
course,
keep her pregnant all the time then, Karl.
no, we've got enough children. But I think he was particularly excited because there's not many women her age, because she's still reasonably young, healthy, and MS as well. So he was just like, really excited. And it does make me wonder now, from what you've said, whether actually he was aiming at something slightly different, and this more holistical sort of approach to actually what's going on inside her body, not just at a neurological level, but everywhere else.
Yeah, because the whole endocrine system, all of the hormones in the body, that's a whole nother field of study. Like, we have an endocrinology department, and for sure when you're pregnant, your hormones are changed. And of course you've also got, so this like, if I've blown your mind already, sorry, I'm just going to blow it further. When you're pregnant, you have a new person inside of you that has their own multiple intelligences. So you're no longer dealing with the 3 or 5, however many wide you want to go to in you. You're also having that conversation, and I've worked with some pregnant ladies where we're also talking to those multiple intelligences of the baby.
Wow. So there's even that level of consciousness within the intelligences in infancy. That's, in fact, that links somewhat to a guest that I had on a couple of months ago, who she was talking about the trauma of adoption on infants who you wouldn't usually think are conscious to the fact that adoption's going on and everything that's going on, but actually clearly the body is, because there are certain patterns that she's researched that show, and that, I guess, almost feeds into there, just a link to what you're saying there as well. There is a level of consciousness in those intelligences, even at, as an unborn child, which is, again, it's like crazy.
And physical development. So I don't want to put any guilt on any mums. Being pregnant is tough. Trying to be pregnant and work full time is tough. And we do need to be cognizant of the fact that when there's a huge amount of stress in the mum, particularly in that last trimester, it does change the development, the neural development of the baby.
Wow.
So for some babies, all babies are born sympathetically dominant. That's normal. But for some of them, they're born sympathetically dominant and they haven't got some of the myelin sheath developed around it, which is the very starting point of our kind of calming parasympathetic nerves, that what we call the ventral vagal system in polyvagal talk. That normally goes from kind of the second trimester through to about age 3. So that's why a young baby, they do not have the ability to self-soothe when they're young. They need to be co-regulated by an adult. But if you have a baby who has, I'm thinking at the moment, the baby's being born in war zones. The baby's being born in countries where there's abject famine and poverty. Mm-hmm. Those babies have not got the full development of their nervous systems. And however good the co-regulation is, it's not going to be as effective as it would have been. And basically, they kind of come into life and through those early years in a sympathetic, dominant, hyper alert state. The rates of ADHD are rising. is there something? I guess what we're all curious about is not only what causes it, but is there something we can do to reverse the trend? I don't know whether stress alone is part of the answer. My belief would be it is. If you look at some of the literature, 90% of all adult health issues have a stress component. So if that's true of adults, you kind of go, well, maybe it's true for the kids as well. We certainly know that in terms of regulation, resilience, that certainly has an impact. That's not to say people going, oh, disaster, I was stressed in my pregnancy, I've caused. No, because we now have the knowledge of how to work with that and teach people how to learn how to regulate.
Yeah.
So we can learn to work around most things, but it takes effort. Takes way more effort than if you had a baby born on Zen Island, if there is such a thing, where there was perfect nutrition and absolutely no toxins in the environment, and this beautiful, blissful mum relationship with dad, baby's born. Then none of us come through the absolute ideal route, I wouldn't have thought, because we live in difficult environments. We live in a real world that's constantly changing. And that's where, when I said to you in my latest kind of courses, I teach out beyond the body, because who I am in my 5 brains, it's great knowing that. But I'm impacted by who I'm with, who I'm surrounded by, whose energy I pick up. I'm impacted by the environment that I'm living in. I'm impacted on a quantum level globally in ways I don't even fully understand. So we're not isolated. And I think as coaches, we get in a room with someone, we start talking head to head, and we sometimes forget there's a much, much wider issue going on here that we could bring into the coaching environment.
Is there perhaps a bit of that at play when it comes to addictions? Is it the fact that they're just not listening to one of the intelligences?
There's a huge amount of work around addictions going on at the moment. Gabor Mate, go and look at Gabor Mate's work on addiction. He is absolutely convinced that the source of all addictions is a lack of connection. So that disconnect at heart level. Heart level. So we need, as human beings, there's a few core needs, one of which is the need to belong. And belonging is part of safety, because back in the old days, if I wasn't part of the tribe and I was outside of it, I wasn't going to survive long. I would be attacked. I'd be eaten alive. So belonging is a core need. And yet we are living in a very disconnected society. So if you start to lose a core need, your body, which is wired for survival, needs to look for another way of getting that need met. And for a lot of us, we will go to soothers. Now, for some people, those soothers are drugs or smokes or food, busy at work. We all have different ways of trying to compensate for a need that our body is not getting, which in the short term, and when we start doing it, probably works. And so we'll do it again. So we get that reinforced behavior, and the habit builds, and your body was doing it for a good intention. You then end up with a programmed system 10 years, 20 years later, where if that habit doesn't work for you anymore, it's causing problems, but it's kind of wired in. Mary O'Malley wrote a beautiful book called What's in the Way is the Way. And it's very much about this. In the behaviors that we create become the problems we're having to resolve, because it's an outdated solution.
So let's go back to coaching then. So the impact of being aware of the multiple intelligences when it comes to coaching. So, I mean, I would love to be able to first of all, regulate and understand my own intelligences, but I think the power then to understand somebody else, which intelligence is being used, or the mix, is that possible? Is that what we mean by sort of bringing it into coaching? Because it certainly sounds quite an exciting, idea.
Yeah, I mean, with a proviso that I am not the expert of your body. And so I become kind of the guide, the prompt, the curiosity raising, and draw your attention to your own way of doing, humaning, wisdoming. And then from that, you come up with the answer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit, it is, I used to think before I did this level of coaching that I was non-directional. Now, blank sheet, I go in with not knowing at all. And I absolutely assume that the person in front of me is the expert in their own multiple intelligence system. And all I'm doing is prompting them to reflect on and consider that system and whether it's working for them. Because if it is working for them, I'm not going to encourage them to change it. Even if it sits outside of what my vague model says a good functioning system should look like. So I'll give you an example. In my early days of coaching, this was long before I knew about multiple intelligences, but was a real wake-up call for me. This was a lady who was, in her late 20s. She had had a fall off a horse with a serious back injury, was heavily disabled, wheelchair bound, state funded in terms of housing, disabled car, all of that. But she had really incredible chronic pain. So she was on medical morphine. Even that sometimes didn't work. So she had to top up with cannabis to try to control her pain. Mm-hmm. And I knew her socially. And she rang me knowing I was doing this work. She said, is there anything, I'm in this dreadful place, is there anything you can do to help me manage my pain? And this was back in the days when I was trained in NLP. And NLP does have I love NLP, don't get me wrong. But there is a risk that sometimes you can see it as a magic bullet. And particularly when you're early on in your training, you think, oh yeah, I can do that. I can do a process. I can sort that for you. So I can't even remember what tools I used with her, but I did a few tools with her. It was on the phone. It was late at night. She was already in bed. And she said, she felt much better. Her pain had dropped from like 10 out of 10 to 4 out of 10. Chronic pain. Wow. She could deal with that. Like 4 out of 10 was nothing. So she went to sleep. And afterwards, I said to her, look, if that was useful, I'm happy to work with you over a period of time. And we could see if we could get it down from 4 or, look at other things that might improve life for you. And she kept cancelling appointments.
Okay.
And I went, this is really interesting. Why? And then it occurred to me, it would affect everything in her life. Because the state paid for her housing. The state paid for her car. She hadn't got a job and hadn't had a job for years. She wasn't qualified in anything. So if they took all that away because she suddenly was not in need of the level of care, cut call for me to go, it's not my place as a coach to predetermine the outcome that I think would be the best for that person. They have to make their own choices. And sometimes it looks a little bit strange. And it wouldn't be my choice, but that's not my body and my life to live.
It is an important point because what we think is right, what we think is the right way, that is just our perspective based on what we've constructed. I mean, I'd like to think that I sort of build that into some of how I coach, but I know for a fact that there'll be times where I'm working with a client and I'll be thinking in my head, no, don't do that. You want to do this instead. And at times I bet that will leak out. So I'm only human.
Yeah, we're all human. And I think sometimes it leaking out is a good thing. But if it leaks out as I'm curious, I'm wondering, rather than you need to do that. The other one that I commonly find myself having conversations about with my clients, and I cheekily use paracetamol as my metaphor for this. So I might teach somebody, because I work at a level of neurology and physiology with my clients. Most of my clients come in through stress and anxiety routes, and the first port of call really is to get their system regulated. Now, I do not have a magic button that they can press. I can teach them techniques that can help them to change their neuroplasticity to get different results.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they'll come back week 2, week 3, and I'll go, how have you got on with this? How have you got on with this breathing technique? Or how have you got on with? And they go, oh, yeah, I did it once or twice. Neuroplasticity is only going to happen with constant repetition.
Mm.
And so sometimes I do get a bit directive, and I'll say, look, if you had a headache and there were paracetamol in the cupboard, would they work if you didn't take them? Because, and that's a gut function, right? So if somebody's not taking action on this stuff, there's something at gut blocking them. My belief is always that the body has got your best intentions at heart. Interesting, at heart. And so what is it that the gut believes that means that it's better not to do whatever it is than to change and get the result you want? There's way more people are frightened of, excelling than failing. We know that in literature. So I've got a 23-year-old client at the moment who has an abject fear of a particular cultural group, to the point that he won't go on buses, he doesn't like going out in the street, he's stopped his university course and all this.
Oh, wow.
And we've been working to regulate his system, dampen down that stress response, to let him, both in the body and the mind, understand that it is from a previous event. It's not in the present moment. It's a prediction of what if that happened again.
Yeah.
And what we did was, like, I worked with him for ages and couldn't get him to change. He's probably one of the toughest clients I've ever worked with. And even saying that, you see, there's still a presupposition in my system that he will change. However, he said he wanted to change. So we worked and worked. And I'm like, why is he not doing this? We started to go below the surface to a belief and uncovered a belief he was holding subconsciously, that if I change my behaviors, I'm more at risk. So my behaviors, as disruptive as they are keeping me safe. So of course I understand why you're not going to change. So now that you know that, do you want to change? He went, no, not really.
That's interesting though, and there's another coach friend of mine who works very much with listening to your intuition. I wouldn't necessarily say linked to the multiple intelligences, but certainly far more educated in that area than I am when it comes to, it feels funny for a reason. Your body's telling you something for a reason. Don't try and suppress it. Don't ignore it. Explore why your body's telling you that. It makes sense. See, I've always thought of sometimes as my gut as being almost like that overprotective parent that's wrapping me in bubble wrap, and it's like, won't let me live, won't let me make dangerous choices and take risks. But again, there's a reason why, and I know we're sort of like taught to believe that this at times it is misfiring, or perhaps it's going back to Neanderthal times where we needed to be extra safe, but there are no saber-toothed tigers anymore. There are cars that will run you over, which is probably just as dangerous. But I've always thought that perhaps your subconscious stopped you or limited you, and actually it's probably not the case. It's just giving me information that I'm just not reading and interpreting correctly. I'm ignoring it, thinking it's wrong, it's damaging, it's misfiring, whereas it's not. I just don't have the ability to interpret it. Be present with it and understand.
Yeah. And sometimes just literally listening in, giving it a voice, acknowledging that it's been heard, it'll settle. It'll go, all right, then, as long as you're aware. And it'll let you do whatever it was you were going to do. Now, another thing just to kind of throw in the mix, the gut and the heart, the autonomic nervous system, they don't have a language area. So our language area sits, Broca's area in the head, left-hand side of the head, although language is processed on both sides of the brain, meaning is processed on the right. So the gut doesn't speak in long academic sentences. It's not going to come out with great big story. As soon as someone goes into story, that's head brain. Excuse me. So the gut and the heart are more likely to talk in those things you were talking about, those sensations, those feelings, those prods that you get from the inside. It might throw you a metaphor or a symbol or an image. And then you do need to kind of sit with that for a while and go, what does that mean? What's it trying to say? Because an image could be interpreted in many ways. Drawing, one of the techniques I have in my toolbox as a coach is IDT, which is interactive drawing therapy. And often when someone's kind of struggling to verbalize, I'll get my board out, get my box of crayons out, and I'll say, just show it me on a page. And beautifully, that subconscious and that deep gut and heart intelligence will talk on the page. And then you reflect back what they've drawn and they get the insight. They're not even aware of what they've drawn necessarily.
So their struggle is interpreting that image and trying to articulate it in words, which they're finding difficult, but actually giving you the raw version of it.
Yeah, and remember, as soon as your head's trying to interpret, it's creating the story. So it's modifying,
yeah,
what actually has been said. But if we come back to kind of this world that most people can relate to, I suspect a lot of people could relate to a moment in time where they suddenly thought, oh, I've just thought of so and so, I ought to call them.
Yeah.
And you call them and they're having a really bad day, or they're like, oh, I'm so glad you called. I need, how on earth did we know of the 8 billion people on the planet that person needed us to ring there and then? And this is where that whole kind of, whether you call it telepathy, whether you call it quantum, there's quantum entanglement. And then if you go deeply into that, there's kind of positive quantum entanglement and negative quantum entanglement. How many clients have you got who can't let go of something, who, years after an event are still somehow tied to and stuck with someone who abused them 20 years ago? So I think for me, is back to that plain sheet of paper. I go in not knowing with every client, and I trust their interpretation of what's going on and work with that. And whether or not it's strictly literal or metaphorical, does it matter? If I can help them to change that map of the world in a way that they want to change it into, then I don't really need to know whether it was literal or metaphorical.
No, it's a valid point. And again, the other key point as well is if they want to change it for something that works in a different way for them. Again, there's no such thing as good or right or wrong, really. It's like, well, what do you want it to be? How's it working for you?
Yeah.
And how do you want it to work differently? Amazing, fascinating.
And once you change at that level, so for me in 2012, while I made that massive change, I kind of remember sitting going, oh, have I got a heart then? Am I completely heartless? And the guy that was training, Grant, went, oh, look, I know you well enough to know that you absolutely have. And it's not about whether or not it's there. It's whether or not you're listening and are you letting your head dominate and all of that kind of stuff. So I kind of started to play and learn to open it up. And, you might have thought the moment at which I got the breakthrough of I can be anything, that was the end of coaching. It was the start of coaching, because I then had to learn how to be in the world with an open heart, because in those first few months, I got trampled on. I opened up the heart space and people were like,
wow.
And I'm like, hang on a minute, I'm going to put those walls back up again just for a moment. Let me work out where they sit and how high they are and how osmotic they are.
Was that your gut that did that, though, from the safety perspective?
Well,
Or
possibly
what the
it was
hell?
definitely the heart I was feeling it at. Like
Right.
I got hurt because I let people in that I had good reason to leave outside.
Got you.
Um, the whole thing about trust, you know, whether or not you trust someone, it's so for me, this is not about just open wide each of the doors of all of the intelligences and let they've all been the way they are for a good intention. And any change work we do, we need to be deeply respectful for what impact that will have, not only in their own life, but in their family, in their workplace, in their community,
Mm.
and kind of walking them through the awareness of that change. So the wise decisioning is a process rather than a one-off event. It's like ongoing.
And it's that continuous learning, unlearning of certain behaviors and patterns and relearning ones that work better
Yeah.
for you. If somebody would like to speak to you about your research, finding out more, I mean, I am fascinated. I would love to know more about how to understand, how to key into, or work out which intelligence is driving at that particular time, or what the mix
Yeah.
is. If somebody wanted to find out more information, or perhaps speak to you about potentially working with you, or hear more about your research, how could people get in touch with you, or contact you?
Yeah, so I have a website, embrainingforsuccess.com. I'm also on LinkedIn as Suzanne Henwood, Facebook, Embraining for Success. So, a quick stalk, you'd find me very, very easily. I think one of the things I would say to people that we're so excited about this tool coming out, that if you want to be in the know of that when it gets launched, just email me, flick me your email address through any of those means, or directly Suzanne at Embraining for Success. And I'll make sure you're on the list to get the information of that as soon as it's launched. And then from that, we're developing a multiple intelligence coaching certificate that will go in parallel with that. And also a facilitator certificate that people will. So the tool, it's Wednesday here in New Zealand. I am waiting literally to hear today that the tool is being signed off. 7 years of work. It will
Exciting.
go out to beta test hopefully this week. As soon as that is out there, a bit like you can do Myers-Briggs
Yeah.
questionnaires online, it will give you a result for all of your intelligences and all of the functions within your intelligences. And then it gives you a 58-page report. Now, what we're going to do is train facilitators in that report so that you can coach people through the results that they've got so that they fully understand it. So that is all in the design at the moment. I've just been through a massive pivot change in my business to set this new system up. So yeah, flick me your email. I'll make sure you go on the early notice for that and can get your access to that tool, hopefully in the very near future.
And I will definitely be on that list. And having previously done Myers Briggs and the Kayla's drivers and DISC, and it's like it fascinates me. I've got this fascination with almost wanting to understand and pigeonhole myself, even though I don't want to be limited. I need to understand, and maybe that's just I don't know which intelligence, which brain is getting me to do that. But anyway, we'll leave that.
Yeah, yeah. The
Um,
hint is in the language, right? To understand is probably
yeah,
head
okay,
brain.
head, head. What an insightful chat. I mean, you really have changed since just the few conversations that we've had, the way that I guess I think about intelligence in
Think.
general, and how we think, what happens to us, how we process it. It really is mind blowing. I keep saying things that are references to the head. I'm much
Might
more of
give
a
you a hint about which
yeah,
your
I'm a
most
head
popular
brain, sort of
brain is.
like, yeah. But no, it really has been fantastic, and I will share your social links with this episode as well, so that people can get in touch. But this has been a magnificent episode, and I'm sorry for keeping you so long as well. Although, to be fair, it's Wednesday early morning for you. You're sort of living on tomorrow at the moment. Anyway, it's still Tuesday for me.
I
Um,
know the metaphor of I am your future, you see. So
You are. You have you literally just given us some futuristic stuff, possibly from a quantum level. I don't know, but it really has been fantastic. For everybody listening, I hope that's been as mind-blowing for you guys as it has been for me. And thank you so much, Dr. Suzanne Henwood, for spending some of your time with us and explaining how multiple intelligence works. And I can't wait for your psychometric tool to be available, because I shall definitely be on that waiting list.
That's it for this episode of Coach Fireside Chat. If you found value in today's episode, please be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an insight-packed conversation. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe for more real talk on coaching. And don't stop there. Check out other fantastic episodes where I sit down with more incredible coaches who are out there making a real impact. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.